Our nation paid a massive price in blood, by far the most casualties we have ever suffered in any conflict, okay? So how does that get factored into then the price, the reparations? Yeah. I'm just wondering, where does that go? See, this is why eventually this is just, it's very clear. This is about power. This is about who gets to determine who gets what now, today. And it's certainly not about justice, because what does that even look like? They think they can control the past and therefore control the present, or rather control the narrative of the past and use it to dictate the politics of this moment. Huge example of this is obviously the 1619 Project to come up with what is essentially a new founding and framework of this country, rooted in, the evils and oppression of America. And the only way to deal with this today is to put the people in charge now who believe in the narrative of America as a fundamentally rotten, evil, awful place. Did you see also the polling, by the way, about Democrats that I'm trying to remember what the exact, less than half of Democrats are proud to be Americans.
I mean, and the other scary part was in the wake of Ukraine, if you remember, Buck, what percentage of Democrats would actually stay and defend the country if it was invaded? Over half of Democrats would leave. This is a stunning poll result. Again, if America were invaded, would you stay and fight or flee? Over half of Democrats would flee. And the reason for this era of Democrats is because they believe America is a rotten, awful place. Now, most of these people have never actually gone anywhere else, right? This is one of the advantages. If we had some sort of Peace Corps requirement or even service requirement in this country for 18 and 19-year-olds, if you had to go to some third world countries and see what it's actually like there, then you might come back to America and say, hey, it ain't perfect, but we're getting an awful lot right. Unfortunately, most of these people have no clue what the rest of the world is like at all. And so they sit around on their phones denigrating America with no understanding or comprehension of larger world affairs.
My advice always to young people, as somebody who got sent for work to a number of places that were conflict zones, 2 war zones and other places where there were active insurgencies and major counterterrorism operations underway because of Al-Qaeda and these different jihadist entities. I spent my 20s basically in that world dealing with that. You go to other places and you come back to America and you want to kiss the ground that this country was built on. You love, which is why so many people that also come back and have done military service also have just a feeling for this country is incredible. It really, and they went to fight because they know it's incredible, and they come back and I think have a recognition. Talk to any vet who spent a lot of time in Iraq or Afghanistan. You come back to America, you're just like, this place is phenomenal. Anyway, we bring all this up because, also we can hold in our heads two thoughts at the same time. America is the greatest country that has ever existed. It's also got some problems that we should address, and the libs want to destroy it. These are two things or two areas where you can think about at the same time. But fighting over history is not just an intellectual exercise. It's important. And making sure that we have a history that is in the proper context and people understand who did what and when and how we got to this place we're currently in. Someone who has not read, I can assure you, anything substantial about the history of America is Mr. Don Lemon. The new morning, big promotion. You hear this? Big promotion.
Big promotion.
To the morning show over at CNN. He was talking to the royal commentator, Hillary Fordwich. Is she on your speed dial, by the way, Clay? Do you and Hillary chat about the royals?
Hillary and I text all the time at the latest drama. Buck, I was clicking to see what the lip readers were saying about all the different royal interactions during the ceremony for Queen Elizabeth.
I got something I got to admit. I told her I was going to because I looked at her last night. I said, et tu, Carrie?
She all in?
She's like, look, I got to agree with Clay. The royal intrigue is fascinating. I was like, no,
10 million people watched the funeral yesterday, which is basically unheard of. Like more people, I think, watched the funeral than watched the Oscars, to kind of put in context. And people talk about the Oscars a lot. And this was the 10th day. I'll even be honest with you. This thing didn't seem like it was ever going to end. And
Yeah.
so, Carrie's like most, most people out
Care
there.
Bear
She
is
joins
apparently
me on
on.
the team.
She's on Team Clay on this one. She's like, I think it's fascinating, the intrigue, the drama, the pageantry, and anyway,
She's right.
Bringing
All of it.
Bringing it right into my house. I can't believe it.
Yep.
But anyway, the royal commentator Hillary Fordwich, when Don Lemon said that the Brits effectively should pay reparations, here is her, I think. On it, part of we have two pieces of this exchange.
Should play the whole
Let's
thing,
start. We're gonna
'cause
play
this
the
is
whole
amazing.
thing. Start with it. Go.
Well, this is coming when, there's all of this wealth and you hear about it comes as England is facing rising costs of living, a living crisis, austerity budget cuts, and so on. And then you have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Now, I know you and I are both like prize fighters who want to get in the ring on this right away because there's so much there. Like, who gets the money? What's enough money? Who pays for it? What if, like you have two ethnicities, you have one parent from the UK.
You get what percentage are we going to have a blood, blood analysis? Also, how about the fact that lots of people are immigrants who arrived who might be black post-slavery, right? So you are, let's say you're a Nigerian immigrant who's only been here for 20 years. Why would you get reparations for American-related interest? And the large picture here, which no one ever discusses, and I hope we can start to inject this into the discourse at least as every time this comes up. America only had slavery, the United States of America, for 80 years, okay? We, from 1783 to 1863, only 80 years, but this is the British response on this,
so the
and you're
Brits
gonna
have
love
their
it.
own history with this, and what she said in response to Don Lemon, the royal commentator, dropping some truth bombs here.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
I mean, it's a fascinating and important point she makes here about how there's also, it's often not talked about, but there were minorities, that what we think of as minorities today, who owned slaves.
Oh yeah.
If there were actually the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and also the role that Latin America played in it is something that gets very little time and coverage in the media for sure. But Clay, I mean, okay, so we're going to start doing this like we have a ledger, like, okay, the Brits, so they made these
responsible for X percentage.
The X percentage. Yeah. Well, where does this come in though? Because she also went on to talk about the thousands of Brits who died on the high seas to end slavery. So I want to know. I mean, it's something I've asked before. So if I had ancestors who died fighting
in the Civil
War, do I get like credit for that, or how do we actually do this? How do we deal with the fact that you would know, you're the Civil War buff. Total casualties in the Civil War were, deaths in the hundreds of thousands.
600,000, I believe, is the number of Union soldiers who died. I think I'm correct in this off the top of my head during the Civil War. One of them was one of my ancestors. I had, northern and southern ancestors who fought on both sides of that war. So yeah.
So how do we gauge
their lives?
What is the price in blood that was paid to end slavery in the American Civil War? And then how does that affect reparations? I'm just wondering, because she brings up, for example, with the Brits, thousands of men never made it home to their families to fight to end slavery on the high seas. That was their role in the British Navy, and they died in that pursuit. So are they exempted from these reparations? And also, who do the reparations go to exactly?
Yeah. No, the reparations argument is ridiculous. 620,000 total dead across Union and Confederate soldiers. So around 360,000 Union deaths reported, 258,000 Confederate deaths reported. So 360,000 Northern soldiers died. Many people listening to us right now would have an ancestor who died in the Civil War. I did, certainly fighting on the side of the North. Should there not be,
but ancestors died. Ancestors died in huge numbers on both sides of that conflict, and so you say that was our nation paid a massive price in blood, by far the most casualties we have ever suffered in any conflict. Okay, so how does that get factored into then the price? The reparations. I'm just wondering, where does that go? See, this is why eventually it's very clear. This is about power. This is about who gets to determine who gets what now, today. And it's certainly not about justice, because what does that even look like?
It's 100% true. And I just love Don Lemon getting dunked on there, because at the end he was like, oh, that's interesting. Like he didn't even have a response to her historical knowledge. And what I appreciate her bringing up is, no one ever mentions the fact that the people in Africa were initially enslaved by other African kings and then were sold to the people who engaged in the slave trade. But the slavery started in Africa, and no one ever wants to talk about that responsibility at all in the overall global slave marketplace.
And I'm just wondering, do we get any extra credit for those of us who had ancestors who fought to prevent the world from being enslaved by the Nazis?
Seems like kind of a big deal.
I think that's kind of a big deal too. So do we get credit for that, or is it just no? It's all okay, yeah. I think everyone's seeing here.
Return, you get like a little different check boxes along the way to find out how much responsibility you actually have.
I mean, and this is the other part of it too. I mean, I wonder for people who have a mixed ethnic heritage. So do they get the check, but then they have to send the check back, or how does that work if you're doing reparations from the British Empire from 500 years ago? You know what I mean? It doesn't make.
It's totally absurdly illogical, and also it doesn't even consider that the entire rationale for affirmative action, which has now existed for 70 some odd years in this country almost, was predicated on what? Redress for past grievance, which is a form of reparations that has been ongoing for generations now in this country, and by the way, needs to end.